Good morning. My name is Norm Green. I am the Chief Technical Officer of GemStone Systems, or the title my wife uses, Head Nerd, but I'll answer to either one. It's good to be here. First time I remember being the only Smalltalk vendor at ESUG. And I think this is the first time we have fewer North Americans than South Americans at ESUG that I can remember. So it's an interesting year for the interesting times that we live in. But I'm glad to have made it. My talk is in three parts. I'm going to talk about GemStone, the company, who our customers are for those here that don't know us well. Then I'm going to let James Foster talk about a very quick overview of what is GemStone, how does it work, GemStone 101, and a few slides for those that are not familiar with it. And lastly, I'll go through product roadmap, what we've been working on, and what is coming up in new releases, new versions of the product. So this is the first part, the company. We've been around for 40 years. It's hard to believe. We started in '82 as Servio Logic Corporation, back when the original solution was in hardware. So there wasn't software in those days to support it. Early days of Linux, or Unix rather, and all that. First version shipped in '86. In '95, we changed our name from Servio Logic to GemStone. I joined in '96. Then we got bought by a German company called Brocat in 2000, and then the .com meltdown happened in 2001, and we were divested. There was a management buyout, and then we were acquired again in 2010 by VMware, and VMware divested us to our owner, Dan Ware, who is the CEO, in 2013. So the company is now privately held by one person, my boss, Dan, and he has no interest in selling or any more acquisitions. It's too much paperwork, too stressful. So we will stay like this probably forever. So just a quick run through of who our customers are and what we do. You'll see we're in many different spaces in terms of customers. In the financial area, some of our flagship customers are JP Morgan, based out of London and New York. And they have a platform called Capital, which is financial product trading, derivatives. They've been using it since '93. UBS in Zurich does their precious metals settlement system in GemStone and Smalltalk. DBO stands for Distributed Back Office. Also a very large customer of ours since 1990. A company called the ICE, who actually owns the New York Stock Exchange. It started as an energy trading company, and now they're just a global trading company. Uses us for some of their trading engines since '94. Momentum Wealth is in South Africa. They're doing financial portfolio management of large customers. Lifeware, we've heard about earlier this week. There's some people from Lifeware here, also in Zurich. One of our most sophisticated users. They find all the hard problems that we don't, but it's good to have that. And Guava is in Perth, Australia, and they do financial and treasury software in GemStone and Smalltalk. Guava is probably one of the only customers I've never visited. It's just too hard to get to Perth. It's a long way, but someday. On the manufacturing side, Texas Instruments has been a GemStone user since 1991. They use it for controlling some of their semiconductor fabrication fabs. They are probably our highest uptime customer. Their downtime is measured in minutes per year, because when the fab goes down to change anything, the clock is ticking and money is being spent. So normally they have one downtime for an hour or less on Christmas Day. Otherwise, the fab runs 24/7, 365. Onto is a semiconductor manufacturing software that acquired the rights to the Texas Instruments system called Works some time ago, and I've remarketed it to other chip manufacturers in Asia, China, Indonesia, I think, various places. HTS is one of our newer customers, they do very large air conditioning HVAC systems. So you think of the large soccer stadiums here. What does it take to circulate air in a very large stadium like that? This is a company that bids on those systems in Canada and America and implements them. Their entire business system is called DACS, and it's implemented in GemStone and Smalltalk. They're headquartered in Toronto, Canada. H.B. Fuller is a manufacturing company of adhesives. Think of like 3M, that kind of thing. Industrial applications in Minneapolis, been using us since 1997. On the utility side, Florida Power and Light has been using us since 1992. They have two systems, one called TCMS2. So this is a trouble call tracking system for hurricanes. So if you think about when the hurricane goes through Florida and knocks down all the power lines, when someone calls up and says, my power's out, a ticket is created in this system, which is run by GemStone, and it's routed to the right crew to go out and get the power back on. You can imagine during storms and after storms, the call volume can be very, very high. And now they also accept calls from SMS and the web and email. And so there can be many, many calls. South Florida is very highly populated, and a lot of the calls are duplicates because you want to make sure somebody called to say the power's out. So it gets very high during storms. Another app they have is called Power Billing, and that is used to compute the utility bill for electricity for their largest industrial customers. So it's a system that you have to get right. On the telecom side, there's a company called Atos, which now owns the Conda system. This started as Siemens Austria, and I think it changed hands a few times, but it's a cable provisioning and management system for large telecoms. One of their customers is Telecom Argentina in Buenos Aires that uses Condas and also uses GemStone and Smalltalk on the side for some other projects. SPL Tele is in Germany, and they are also doing telecom workflow management. On the government side, we've been used by the Government of Canada since '96 for a border security application. I don't know much more about it. It's classified, but essentially it tries to detect who's coming into the country that's likely to be smuggling or doing something bad. Similarly, in Norway, the Norway Directorate of Immigration is using GemStone for a visa processing system since 2004. And LEI in the Netherlands is the Dutch Government Agricultural Institute, which is doing agricultural data collection across the Netherlands, compiling data and so on, since '98. We have lots of partners. Some of them are customers, some of them are VARs, value-added resellers that take GemStone and add their application to it and resell it. So we're a member of the Faro Consortium. We always sponsor ESUG and the FAST conference down in Argentina. And we were a gold sponsor for Camp Smalltalk Supreme in Toronto. So if there's a conference, we really try to sponsor and show up. In terms of the company, we've been trying to hire some younger faces as our staff gets closer to retirement. We hired this gentleman named Kurt Capella in 2019. Kurt is kind of a dream for us. He's kind of a young guy that started playing with Smalltalk and just got it. He drank the Kool-Aid and has never looked back. I wish I had more. I wish I had 10 of this guy. He's great. So in a few days, I fell in love. This is from his cover letter, and I can't say it any better than that. So Kurt has been a great addition and wants to do this the rest of his long career. We also hired a guy that you're probably familiar with, Andres Valud. Started with us this summer, optimizing our VM performance. Andres knows a scary amount about the Intel instruction set. He knows more, he's forgotten more about it than I know. So he has been down at the very low level all summer, optimizing our native code generator to generate faster native code. He is doing his PhD in math at the Oregon State University and is working for us summers until he finishes that, and then our plan is to hire him on full-time. So he's going to be with us about 4 months a year and then full-time in a few years once his PhD is finished. But just a great guy. He's doing some fantastic work. Very glad to have him. We're also hiring more on the quality side. We need people that like to write quality tests in Smalltalk, unit tests. We lost a person a couple of years ago for that role and are still kind of feeling that. So it's a great role, but you have to be really passionate about writing tests and figuring out why they fail and you know, getting those reds to go to green and so on. It takes the right individual. We're still looking, got some leads, but if you know anybody, please send us the resume. That's part one, and part two, I will turn over to James for a lightning tutorial in GemStone.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Norm. So one question we often get here at ESUG is, how many of you have used GemStone? And about 2/3 are familiar with it, and maybe 1/3 have used it. One of the things we like to do at ESUG is recognize that there are new people who are attending that are maybe not familiar with GemStone. And so we'd like to take a few minutes and just give you a brief overview of what GemStone actually does. GemStone addresses limitations of traditional Smalltalk, but not just traditional Smalltalk. GemStone addresses some limitations that exist in any object-oriented programming environment. With Java, with Python, with Ruby, with other languages of that sort, you're limited to what you can fit in memory. You have only one VM that is connected to the object space. You can only run on one host. And if your environment crashes, then you lose your work. And these problems exist in any programming environment, except GemStone with a database. With GemStone, your object space is visible to thousands of VMs that are running on thousands of hosts or machines. The object space is limited by disk, not by RAM. So you can have terabytes of object space or image. And your changes are managed by ACID transactions. ACID, an acronym for atomic, consistent, isolated, and durable. And that durable characteristic means that once you commit a transaction, it is persistent. And even if your environment crashes, the machine goes down, when you come back up, restart, the data will be just as you committed it. And that commit is not several seconds to save the image. It is measured in milliseconds, practically instantaneous. So the key features: billions of objects, thousands of users, thousands of machines, thousands of transactions per second, and terabytes of data. So this makes it an ideal environment for hosting even large websites. With databases, one of the challenges you have, and even any multi-user application, is concurrency. GemStone has good solutions for concurrency. Multiple user sessions, thousands of sessions, all seeing the same object space. Built-in transactions, commit, abort, continue. The concurrency management, typically there's optimistic concurrency where you make your changes and then just commit and let the system say whether or not the commit was successful or had conflicts. The alternative is the pessimistic concurrency, where you acquire a read or write lock before your operation, and if you're successful in acquiring the lock, then you're guaranteed to be successful in making the commits. We have namespaces, private and public, so that you can have objects that are shared as well as objects that are private to you. Security is an important part of any database. With GemStone, we have login security. Each user has a user ID and password. And the user is associated with groups, world permission, so that each object can be associated with a user. When the virtual machine reads the object from the repository, it validates your permissions. Are you allowed to even send messages to the object? For users, the user is identified through a user profile that has certain permissions with it, as well as certain authentication. The authentication can be with a password in the database, but that requires you to manage the users in the database. And many large companies like to use a single sign-on environment where the user is managed through Microsoft Azure, Google, or LDAP, PAM authentication, X509, and so on. So we have a variety of ways of authenticating a user. Then each user can be assigned certain administrative rights. Are you allowed to do a backup, to do garbage collection? Are you allowed to change someone else's password? So these are types of security that are associated with the user. But don't think of this as external to your Smalltalk environment. This is not a separate database from Smalltalk. This is Smalltalk. It's objects, it's turtles all the way down. All objects all the time. The classes, the schema definition, classes, meta classes, methods are objects. Blocks, closures are objects. And the exceptions are objects, just as you would expect in any ANSI Smalltalk implementation. Now, of course, since it's a database and we expect to have billions of objects, you will have large collections. Your customer list, your parts list, your user list. These can have millions of objects. And in a traditional Smalltalk, if you're iterating over all the objects, that a sequential search for which objects satisfy this criteria could take a long time. In GemStone, we have support for B-trees, the traditional approach in databases for doing fast searches. You can create a B-tree index on a collection that has equality comparison and another that has identity comparison. So you can check for name equals something, or country of origin is identical to something. We interface to other Smalltalks. So the traditional model from the 90s and early 2000s was to have a client-server application with the fat client or rich client, and many early customers would use VA Smalltalk, VisualWorks, and now we can use Pharaoh to connect to GemStone, and another tool, Jadeite, we'll look at in a moment. We can interface to other languages. C++, GemBuilder is available, GemBuilder for C. With that, you can have access to foreign function interfaces from any language, can connect to the library and give you connectivity. Java is another option, but if you look around, you can find open source connections for Ruby, Python, other environments. Relational databases, often the big industrial customers will say, we want to use Oracle for things. And with Oracle, you can put things into Oracle and have that your database of record that can be used for queries and the SQL queries that people want to make. GemStone is supported on many platforms, Linux, both x86 and ARM, Apple Macintosh, Mac OS, x86 again, as well as the Silicon, M1, M2, Oracle Solaris operating system, again on x86. IBM, we have a couple customers that are still using IBM hardware, PowerPC, and then we can run clients on any of those and also Windows. Raspberry Pi on this slide is mentioned as experimental. Actually, the first line says Linux on ARM, so Raspberry Pi is available for Linux, and that works well. GemBuilder is the traditional client IDE and object replication, transparent object replication. That is available for VisualWorks 9.1 on Windows and Linux, and from VA instantiations for Windows. Other tools are available. Jade is an open source IDE that runs on Windows. It is created in Dolphin Smalltalk, and I've been developing it for 20 years now. And it supports all versions of GemStone going back to the 32-bit implementations. It's, again, free, open source, browsers, inspectors, debuggers, available on GitHub. And in it, we have the traditional 5-pane Smalltalk code browser, for example, where you can see your dictionaries, your class categories, classes, method categories, methods, and then the code. Jadeite is a new project that is a fork from Jade that GemStone is developing for a customer that wants to move off of the more traditional GemBuilder environment in the commercial and wants to move to using source code management in an open source project. So that is available supporting Rowan, Git, Tonal, and migration tools for other things, including, I believe, Store. The licensing model for GemStone, there's a community edition. We'll look at the terms for that in a moment. Free for any use, including commercial. So go ahead and start your commercial product and see how far you can grow. You can buy perpetual licenses, annual subscriptions, and if you're developing a product either to sell as a shrink-wrapped product or as a software as a service, you can discuss licensing terms that you pay royalties on that. And our goal is to find out what works for you, how can we add value and share in that value. So terms can be very reasonable for small resellers. The Community Edition, you can start out, just download it without any communication with us. You don't have to send us your email address or sign up for anything with that. You can just download it, run it, get a 10 gig repository. If you send us an email saying you want to grow to a bit larger, you can double the shared page cache and have a 50 gig database. And we'll send you a license for that every year. Just send us an email asking for it. You can increase to unlimited database size, unlimited number of repositories in production for $1,500 a year. So we're trying to make a very gentle on-ramp to get you going on GemStone. Support, web support, help requests, email, during our normal business hours, emergency 24/7 support, mailing lists, we have information there. And now Norm is going to discuss the roadmap and things that you can expect in the upcoming release. Thank you.
Currently, we're working on version 3.7, and in order to do that, you need to use a private key to start the database. And once the database is started, it operates as normal. And we're doing encryption with OpenSSL. We never want to write our own crypto. So we build and ship the OpenSSL libraries with the product. This is a quick command line example of how to create an encrypted database extent. You just do the copy DBF with some certain arguments. Pass in your key. You can encrypt 128 or 256 certificate, and away you go. Our convention for encrypted extents and translogs is the .sdbf suffix, where normally it's a .dbf suffix. So secure DBF is what that means. Also in 3.6, we restricted perform on server. This is a request from one of our customers. Perform on server is a method that executes something in the shell of the host. And we added the ability to have a whitelist, so only certain commands can be executed in the Smalltalk VM. We added 4 special or immediate object classes in 3.6, small date and time, small scale decimal, and small time. And these are nice because they never take up disk space. An immediate holds its value within the object ID itself. So they're very fast and inexpensive to use. We added the ability to output GSList as JSON format. GSList is a command that just tells you, show me all the GemStone services running on this machine. We added the ability to have customer master keys. So what this is you can have a key service out on the cloud, think AWS, and some external customer wants to control when the data can be unlocked and accessed. So it's not within the database owner's control. In order to look at my data, I have to give you a key on the cloud, and we will unlock it, and we'll make the key valid, say, for 2 hours, and after that, it locks again. So we added some support for this for one of our financial customers using the AWS C++ toolkit that Amazon provides on GitHub. We also added support for something called Prometheus. This is coming in 3.7. It's actually also in 3.6.5. And I think someone mentioned Grafana the other day. Prometheus and Grafana generally work together, but this is used by Linux administrators to monitor their systems, switches, all kinds of things. It's open source, and we wrote a plugin for it so you can monitor GemStone with it. You can get graphs like this. You can basically monitor any GemStone statistic that you want and display it on a dashboard. It's not as rich as Stat Monitor and VSD for those that have used that. That's our native tools, but it does plug into the Prometheus Grafana architecture. I mentioned before the work that Andreas Valud is doing for us on getting the VM to be faster. Basically by reducing the number of instructions and the number of branches and improving branch prediction and all kinds of tricks he has in his bag of tricks. I'm now told the average performance improvement in our performance test is about 35%. I hope that translates to customer applications. We have a bunch of benchmarks that we run to test the VM speed, and that's very positive. It's exceeded my expectations. Also for 3.7, we're going to port the customer master key architecture feature that I mentioned for AWS over to Microsoft Azure. Everybody wants it in their own cloud format, so the next one to do is Azure. We implemented a faster path for instance migration. Unlike traditional Smalltalk, if you want to add an inst var to all these objects of a class and you have 1 billion of them, we have to go through the entire database and change the object structure to add that slot in the objects. And that can be quite time consuming, first to find them all and then to update them all can take quite a bit of time. So we tried to encapsulate that down in a primitive in C to do it all as optimally as possible. So you can now specify up to 2,000 classes and the code will go through and locate all the objects, update them all, and commit the transaction at the end. We added a couple new classes to support SSH and SFTP in 3.7. So there's a new class called GSSSH socket. Once you connect, you can execute remote commands like you would an SSH command line on Unix or Linux. And similarly, SFTP support to support transferring, reading and writing remote files to the server. We added a new class for reading streams on byte objects. The general streams don't assume necessarily a byte object, they assume any kind of collection. And since reading files from disk and parsing it with a stream is a very, very common thing to do, we wanted to optimize that to have a stream that is just for byte objects and does it as quick as possible. We're also working on Rowan. That's what Dale's spending his time on these days, and that is a package manager for GemStone, and it deals with files in the tunnel format. It's not finished yet. We're still working on it. I'm not sure how much native Rowan support we're going to have in 3.7, but it is coming. Then there's Martin's Sparkle project. He did a presentation on that in January for the UK Smalltalk users group. Some of you may have seen. He was originally planning to be here, but could not at the end come to Novi Sad. But his talk is up on Vimeo. The URL is there, and his talk, I think, there is more detailed than the time he would have had here anyway. So it's a great talk if you're curious about that. Sparkle is not intended to be GBS for Pharo because GBS uses the model of transparent object. I don't care whether the object's in GemStone or the client, I just want to treat it like an object. And that is predates web servers and the internet model for doing things. So instead of a complete GBS for Pharo, he's working mainly right now on inspectors and debuggers and trying to get those correct. So you can look at GemStone objects in inspectors and debug exceptions that come up and have the debugger to be rock solid, because getting the debugger right is critical in Smalltalk and is probably one of the hardest things to get right. It's taken a lot of time. A couple of new open source projects that we have on GitHub. There's a GemConnect for Postgres now. That's up on GitHub, and also a connection for RabbitMQ to talk to GemStone. And that is my last slide. And time-wise, oh, we're good. Look at that. Any questions for me or James? Yeah, Norbert.
Just because lately you mentioned the remote object replication, so we still have this gem builder story, so it wasn't ever available for Faro, and there was reasons to do so. Could you still explain what's the difference between the gem builder and this remote object replication?
Well, the gem builder for Smalltalk originally was designed to be transparent, is what they called it. So when you have an object in the image and it came from GemStone, you would not know necessarily. It's just some object you send messages to. And if it's a GemStone object, it would send the message back to GemStone potentially. And it would update the state in the image and manage all the dirty object tracking and all that stuff for you. It turns out there's a lot to get right with that. It's a very complicated code. It's not how people are doing applications, say, in the last 10, 15 years. It's more of a 90s model. And we just didn't want to replicate that with Faro and all the problems that brings with it, since we didn't think it was the best use. But we recognized we need a solution for Faro, so that's why we started with the inspectors and debuggers. So what it really doesn't have is the two-object space, model that GBS has. Do you want to add anything to that?
Well, the RSR, remote server replication,
Yes.
has a very limited or well-defined, so the
Right.
pure replication or transparent replication can replicate any object. The RSR that Martin is leading is remote service replication, and it will transfer certain instance variables of subclasses of something.
It's mostly strings and integers, which is 90% of what people want to move around.
Right. So
you can have a string on GemStone and bring the string over to Faro, and the integer and update it, things like that, but not complicated objects or complex object graphs. That's a good way to say it. Does that make sense?
not a generalized solution, but it's a specific solution for almost all use cases that we found maybe easier to implement and easier to use and more powerful.
Actually, general message sending on top of it too, if you want to.
General message sending, yes.
Strict execution and
Yes.
Yeah, there's the equivalent of like a remote perform. You can send a message on the server and get an object back, but that object back needs to be a simple object like a string, an integer, a time, or something like that. We're not returning huge graphs of objects back to Faro, if that makes sense. But yes, you can send a message to a GemStone object and get something back.
But none of the more complicated objects can be arguing to the message.
Probably not.
The thing that gets replicated is the well-defined. So think of it as a variant on JSON in that sense.
I was not saying that.
Yes, well, okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, Steph.
So for me, this is more a comment. So I was watching the video of Martin.
Mm-hmm.
What is, if you need to change something in Faro so that you can build your tools, don't do it in the corner. Maybe proto-object in Faro is not good. If you create your own proto-object, it means that, okay, your tool will work, but nobody else will use that. While if Martin would have contacted us and said, oh, what do you think? And said, okay, yes, let's try build an experiment, and then we integrate, it means that after we maintain it. So my message, this is, try to see that Faro is not a black box. You can go inside, but you can also feedback. So that's
Yeah.
the message. Because I was looking at the idea that the inspector should not send messages, and I said, yes, that's a good idea. It should be like that. So potentially we should do it. And then what we will do is that we will redo what you have done. And that's it. So we are open.
Well, he would also like you, I think, to address the tunnel string symbol thing that we spoke of a while back. That's still a problem for us.
Yes, we discussed, and it's just that we have no time. So,
Right.
and
So.
I know this is one or two
So we just try to talk to you, but we're all very busy. So it's, but I will, yeah, I agree. We should communicate, let you know. I mean, most of the issues I think he's run into are with spec and corner cases there.
But he started, spec was still alpha, so that's normal.
Yeah.
But yes, so you see, so this is, again, this is, if you fix something, he send it, we integrate, we iterate, boom, this is done, and then we need. So I can understand that sometimes, oh, I go faster, I do my stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because everybody does that sometimes. So you want him to do that on GitHub preferred, or on Discord, or don't care? Just somehow.
I think that what is nice is that when you open an issue, everybody can see it, because on Discord there is 25 channels,
Yes.
and it's like, wow. And Discord, this is better for the fast interaction or discussion. And then the bug entries, they are more for the log that other people can follow and understand and archive and come back to that. What is on Discord, we just throw it away at the end. Conceptually, Discord is a river, and
Okay.
the bug archive, this is the fish that you put in the, and you say, yes, this one is interesting.
It works mostly best if you write down what you think all on in the issue and then start a discussion on Discord about it.
Okay.
Because then you get the feedback directly.
And you can post a link to the issue on GitHub and everything, yeah. Okay, makes sense.
And then we should put back on the table the tone and stuff and put pressure on Esteban.
Okay. Well, if you want to send me something on that issue example you mentioned, I'll make sure that he does that, the inspector, whatever you said.
Yes.
And we'll try to do that. I'll pass that along.
Yes, I would really like to see if we can have the inspector not sending messages.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.